Lord of the Oasis. Chapter 91, Poor Acting Skills. It was rare to see people in the Naran desert, and this was the first time. No one knew who were these cavalries and where they came from. The current situation was unclear. Since they did not know whether they were friends or enemies, 5 Sarandian horsemen moved forward cautiously. They held 3-meter-long lances in their hands. They lightly tapped their horse and slowly urged the horse to step in front of Kant. They stared coldly at the cavalries approaching by horses from afar. The 10 desert bandits also urged their horses to stand on Kant's sides. Each of them held their 2-meter-long spears tightly. However, as they got closer, Kant furrowed his brow because he saw that cavalries were actually chasing the rider at the front. He slightly narrowed his eyes. The rider in Kant's eyesight was getting closer and closer. He slowly said, "A woman. It is a woman." Manad held a short sword in his hand and said, "Those cavalries are chasing after her." However, either the 5 Sarandian horsemen at the front or the 10 desert bandits on the sides, their minds seemed to be not bothered by the situation. They still held their weapons tightly and were very vigilant. In such a desolate desert, it was very strange that a dozen of cavalries chasing after a woman. And as desert bandits, they understood better. Since these cavalries dared to chase after that woman so brazenly, there was definitely something fishy. In fact, these cavalries might be just like them. They were also probably bandits who would kill people mercilessly. Subconsciously, their eyes all looked at Kant. However, Kant spurred his horse to a side and glanced. Then he ordered, "Don't be nosy. Make way for them. It looks like those cavalries won't be able to catch up to that woman yet." The canyon of the Stone Pass was not far from them, and the garrison of Baron Dillon was there. If that woman escaped into the canyon, there might be a way out for her. Understood. Manad nodded. He and the others moved their horses to the side. Although they were on guard with their weapons, they all knew that they didn't want to get involved in this chase. Been through warfare of the continent of Karadia, they all understood the rules, never meddled in other people's business. However, things did not went to the plan. The woman at the front was nervously lying on the white horse's back, and wrapped her hand tightly around the horse's neck. When she saw Kant and the others, her eyes brightened. She turned her horse around and she cried out sorrowfully with a desperate face, "Help! Help, gentlemen, those bandits are after me! Help!" As she cried out sorrowfully, she quickly charged her horses over to Kant's side. However, the Sarandian horsemen did not move aside. Instead, they raised their lances and roared, "Stop! Stop!" The desert bandits were also roaring furiously, and raising their spears fearsomely. Her horses charged towards them extremely fast, and it brought all of the mess to them. They were forced to be dragged into this accident, put Kant in danger. How could they not angry? "Please, save me. My father is a great merchant of the eastern county. He will give you a lot of money. Please save me." The woman cried until her face was covered in tears. However, when she saw the shiny spears and lances, she tightened the reins and slowed her white horse. When she was riding and stepped on the stirrups, her legs suddenly cramped as she was extremely exhausted. She fell heavily onto the soft sand at just a few meters away from them. As the sound of the horses hitting the sand behind her getting closer and closer, she couldn't stop, her body trembled. She struggled to stand up, but because of her injuries from the fall, she laid back on the ground. She seemed to have hurt her ankle. She could only raise her head, revealing her fair face. Her pair of big eyes were filled with tears as she pleaded, "Please, save me." Her pleading gaze was aimed right at Kant. Her teary innocent eyes made every man want to adore her. However, the cavalries after her finally caught up in time. They all had a fierce look on their faces. As they glanced over Kant and the others, their eyes exposed their fear. The elite Sarandian horsemen and the fierce desert bandits, their powerful aura was as frightening like theirs. "Hey, do you know we want to capture this woman?" The leader of the cavalry slowly moved his horse forward. He looked at Kant, who was obviously the leader, and said wickedly, "If you don't want to have any trouble, then you'd better hand this woman over to us." Kant narrowed his eyes slightly. He knew his men around him will rush forward and save this woman if he gave them the order. Kant looked the pitiful young girl. Her rose-white fair face, jade-like eyes, her light green long hair, and the neat silk dress on her body all indicated that she was not an ordinary girl. "Save me, save me!" The woman was still crying. However, Kant raised his head and said calmly to those bandits, "Oh, okay, please go ahead." The scene went quiet. The crying beautiful woman looked at Kant incredulously, she was shocked in tears. The ferocious cavalries were shocked as well. Their eyes widened and they were all speechless. A strange silence came upon the groups. Kant was a little annoyed with this silence. He gently tapped pulled the reins and let his horse walk to the side. At the same time, he said to his cavalries, "It's none of our business, let's go." This made the beautiful woman came back to her senses. There was anger in her eyes, but her hands and feet did not stop. She cried and struggled as she crawled towards Kant. "No, no, save me, sir. My father is a great merchant of the eastern country. I can pay 500 great silver coins as a reward." The beautiful woman straight ahead crawled and blocked the way of Kant and the others. She let out a piercing and despairing cry. "Hey, are you sure you want to go against us because of this woman?" The bandit spoke fiercely and pointed the long sword in his hand at Kant and the others. Just like the actors who had finally found their lines, each of them put the fierce look back on their faces and looked at Kant furiously. "Don't think that you can fight against us. Do you know that we are the Demon's Fang? Bandit gang of the northern county? Are you idiots?" Kant frowned slightly. He heard of this bandit gang before, and it seemed that they had quite a lot of power in the northern county. However, he looked at the bandits who wearing armors without any fear and said calmly, "Just order your man take this woman away quickly. Don't block my way." You at this time, even the woman couldn't help but pointed at Kant with her shaking hands. Her widened her eyes, but didn't know what to say. Logically speaking, an arrogant young noble, who just turned into adult and gained power, should have rescued the princess in danger and saved the day. However, the plot went completely off track. "Do you know why?" Kant spoke softly. His eyes glanced over this beautiful woman, his mouth quirked at the corner. "Your acting is too bad." Chapter 92, A Sudden Ambush. As soon as Kant finished his line, "Do it!" Manad suddenly shouted, as if they had a telepathic connection. The horsemen and the desert bandits, who were always alert and long been ready, kicked their horses and urged their warhorse forward. They were holding their weapons and charges fiercely towards the enemy cavalries. The enemy cavalries couldn't react to the attack in time. Their bodies were pierced by the spears and lances. The sharp spears and lances easily pierced through the leather armor and the bodies of the enemy cavalries. Their leather armors instantly dyed red by their fresh blood. The beautiful woman in the white silk dress widened her beautiful jade-like eyes. She was in shock, frightened, and couldn't believe what she just saw. No. The assault of the Sarandian horsemen and the desert bandits was a blink of the eye. It lasted for less than 10 seconds. The 12 enemy cavalries had all fallen under their horses, and their entire abdomen had been pierced. Although they were still alive, from the painful expression on their faces, one could tell that even their internal organs had been pierced. They definitely won't live for long. Even bleeding could lead to death. Kant and the others still didn't have much expression, nor did they have any pity for their life. Compared to the Sarandian horsemen who had fought in battlefields for a long time, and the desert bandits who were savage and brutal, these so-called Devil Fang bandit gang were as weak as children. "It's our turn." Kant spoke slowly, his tone were calm with the elegance of a noble. But the beautiful woman who was lying on the ground in a white dress began to cry loudly. "No, don't kill me, don't kill me. She knelt on the ground, her slim waist formed a gorgeous and beautiful curve. She couldn't stop crying, "Spare me, I can tell you everything. I can give you everything. I'm willing to give everything I have. Please spare me, merciful sir." However, Kant's face did not show any emotion. He did not even look at the woman kneeling in front of him. Instead, he raised his head and looked at the dune. He said calmly, "Don't be agitated. I'm talking about them." On the dune, 4 figures on war horses were coming over with 40 footmen with spears in their hands. Kant was talking about them. "Thank you for sparing me, kind sir. Thank you, thank you. I was only acting along with them and become a spy by your side. I don't know anything else. I don't know anything else." The beautiful woman wept and told him everything she knew. She thought that she was safe. Kant reached into his bag by the side of the horse and pulled out his light crossbow. At the same time, he stuck the iron crossbow on the bowstring. Looking at the enemies who were approaching from the dune, he said calmly, "Is that all?" "Yes, that's all. Take me with you. If I can't complete the mission, they will kill me. But I'm willing to offer myself to you, sir. I'm willing to be your woman." The beautiful woman placed her hand on her chest. Her snow-white dress was breathtaking. However, when she looked at Kant, her eyes instantly widened. There was extreme anxiety in her eyes. She opened her mouth, wanting to say something, but with a soft sound, she could only let out a sound. Bang! Bang! The bowstring vibrated. The light crossbow instantly shot out the thick and heavy iron arrow. The sharp arrow directly shot into the woman's face, and blood splashed out in between her eyebrows. "We don't need woman during a battle." Kant pulled the bowstring again and put the new iron arrow in the slot. Even though he just killed a woman, his face didn't show any emotion at all. This was not Kant's first time killing someone. Even back in the castle of Leo, he already killed a servant who was up to something bad to him. "Get ready to battle." Kant turned his head and looked at Manad. "Be careful." "Thank you for your concern, Lord Kant." Manad nodded with a smile. He did not even look at the woman's corpse under his feet. Instead, he gravely looked at the approaching troops. He said certainly, "It seems to be the troops from the Stone Pass. This is an ambush. Only the Stone Pass could organize a troop to ambush them. After all, Kant just leaves there, and he didn't cover up his tracks. It was easy to track them down and ambush them. Perhaps, but who knows?" Kant nodded and looked at the 40 footmen with spears in their hands. He gave a mocking smile, "But these 4 knights dare to plunder us. They are looking down on us too much." In the flat desert, the 4 cavalries and 40 footmen were just like little sheep waiting to be slaughtered. All 17 of them were cavalries. How dare those 4 horsemen chase after us? Kant did not understand why they had such courage. The strange troops in the distance finally approached. However, they looked nervous. This was because they saw the corpses on the ground beside Kant's group, and the horses that had not escaped far away. Normally, these escaped horses were worth a lot of money. But now, these footmen did not dare to spread out in formation. Instead, they held their spears and formed a tighter formation. The 4 leading horsemen looked even more anxious. The eyes in their helmets looked at Kant. They did not know what to do. They just tightly gripped their long swords. They had their plan, but they didn't know what to do. "Who do I think it is? It's Uncle Dillon's vassal knights." Kant rode forward with a smile on his face. He recognized the 4 burly figures on the horses. His young face looked tender and sincere. "Are you here to save me? There were some bandits from the Devil's Fang bandit gang who wanted to rob us. But they were killed by my guards." Is that so?" The leader of the vassal knights forced a smile. "We came here because we were ordered to hunt down this group of bandits." Yes, that's right. The other 3 vassal knights also forced a smile on their faces and responded. However, they secretly made eye gesture to each other. The 4 of them knew each other for a long time and always been together. So, they knew what to do when they approached Kant. They would immediately take Baron Kant as a hostage. His guards would have to listen to their orders obediently. When that time came, they would be able to do whatever they wanted. That's great. Kant chuckled and lowered the light crossbow in his hand. Seeing him like this, the 4 vassal knights laughed and their eyes lit up. That's right, Baron Kant. You're not injured, that's great. The job of hunting down these bandits should have been done by us. It doesn't matter. It's just easier to kill them right away. Kant laughed lightly, but he raised his light crossbow again. He put light crossbow forward, he straight away pulled the trigger without aiming. Bang! The bowstring vibrated, and the arrow stabbed into the throat of one of the vassal knights. It pierced through his neck and came out from the back of his neck. The arrow was stained with fresh blood, the red color looked more gruesome under the sun. His vocal cords was damaged, cause him unable to speak. His eyes were filled with regrets for life. He wanted to struggle, but all the strength in his body seemed to have disappeared along with the arrow in his throat. He fell off the warhorse, his entire body twitching on the sand. The blood in his throat clogged his breathing, making him dizzy. However, he could still vaguely hear the whooshing sound in the air. As his pupils gradually dilated, he saw his 3 companions also falling off their horses and struggling. One of them had his chest and abdomen stabbed with at least 2 short javelins. Then the others were heavily pierced by the blood-stained long lance. The sharp tip of the lance pierced through the back of their heads, stained by their blood and brain as it fell into the sand layer. The militia that were chased down by the cavalries like a flock of sheep. They eventually scattered and escaped. Cunning. This was last impression of the vassal knight. Chapter 93, The Post-War Clean-up of Forces. This battle ended with ease. 12 cavalries of the so-called Devil Fang bandit group and 4 vassal knights with strong combat strength. There were also 40 armed militia who were holding spears and wearing leather armor. They seemed to have a certain combat strength. Now, they were all lying dead in the desert, the awful smell of blood permeated in the air. Sarandian horsemen and the desert bandits were riding their horses back and forth with their elite scimitars and flanged mace. They were cleaning up the battlefield. Or maybe they were making a last hit. They looked for any enemy who was twitching and struggling to stand up. Then, they would walk over and use the steel elite scimitars in their hands to stab enemies' chests and sliced off their lungs. The desert bandits were much more straightforward. They just raised the flanged maces and smashed a pit on their back of the heads. Kant's order was took no prisoners. In other words, he wanted all of them to die gloriously in battle here. Manad was evaluating the results of the battle. After counting the corpses of the enemies, he rode his horse to Kant's side. "Lord, everything has been taken care of." "Yes." Kant nodded. "How are the results of the battle?" Manad reported, 12 bandit cavalries, 4 vassal knights, and 40 armed militia were all annihilated. No one survived. After a pause, he shrugged and continued, "Our side suffered no casualties." "Sure." The smile on Kant's face showed a slight of mockery. He had just entered the dukedom of Leo's sphere of influence, yet he already encountered such a wonderful performance. Although he did not suffer any losses, Kant felt a chill in his heart. He turned his head slightly and looked at the beautiful woman in the white dress lying on the sand. On her fair and elegant face, a thick and short iron arrow stabbed in between her eyebrows, causing her eyes to bulge out, ruined her beauty. With this few people, and such bad strategy. Do you really think I'm a fool? Kant gave a mocking smile, but his eyes were cold. He had expected that his return to the dukedom of Leo would definitely arouse the vigilance and backlash of some forces. However, he did not expect that this backlash would be so swift and fierce. They were tried to kill him in the first try, let him vanished in the vast desert sea, so he would never able to return. Taking a deep breath, a dialogue box appeared on Kant's screen. Ding! After you fought with all your strength, the enemy was finally annihilated. Side quest, wave after wave of trouble completed. Reward, military equipment, scimitars. Introduction: when you choose to return in your homeland, you should aware that trouble is coming. Moreover, these troubles are coming to you endlessly, wave after wave. Please be prepared, this is only the beginning. This was the dialogue box for completing the side quest. Kant exhaled, his eyes filled with gloom. This performance was full of flaws, just like a third-rate writer's novel. The data was often wrong, and there were many bugs. Kant, of course, would not believe that this was a coincidence. The Demon's Fang bandit gang was famous, of course. They wreaked havoc in Northern County for several years and had not been wiped out. But why they appeared in a desolate and remote land like the Naran Desert, and chased after a weak and helpless businessman's daughter? When Kant saw this happened, he knew that it was not a coincidence. It was a conspiracy. Moreover, the system immediately gave him a side quest, which made Kant even more certain that this was a conspiracy against him. Kant gave a hint to his cavalries. Killing was inevitable. Manad, who had understood Kant's hint, gave an order to the Sarandian horsemen and the desert bandits to rise up and wipe out these bandits in less than 10 seconds. At the same time, they also managed to slow down the 4 vassal knights with their sudden attack, and they won the final victory. A sneak attack was always the best tactic. As for the 40 armed militia, they were not enemies at all. Even if they were holding spears, their spirits had went down after the 4 leaders were killed. In the end, they were all wiped out by 15 cavalries, not a single one of them made it back alive. It was a simple, straightforward, and efficient outcome of the battle. They killed all enemies. And there were no worries after the battle. It didn't matter if Baron Dillon would eventually found the corpses in the desert, Kant would not be responsible for this mess. Even if the 4 vassal knights were dead as well. However, it would be a suicide to rob Kant, a baron from the dukedom of Leo. No laws would be effective against Kant. Even as a lord, Baron Dillon would have to be punished from a higher-ranked duke. Next time, remember to tell Baron Dillon about this matter. Kant turned his head and said to Manad beside him, I think he is a smart person. He will know how to deal with it. Yes. Manad lowered his head and replied. The matter was that simple. When it comes to benefits, Baron Dillon would not go against Kant. Moreover, this is mostly his fault. Manad thought of the seized items and asked Kant, Lord, in this battle, we seized 14 horses, 4 sets of mail armor, 52 sets of various leather armor, as well as weapons such as spears and longswords. The warhorse that had not fled far from the battlefield was brought back by the desert bandits. There were also the weapons and equipment of those who had died in battle. Those weapons and equipment were all pulled down and piled up together. It seemed that there were a lot of them. However, Kant frowned slightly. Looking at the spears and leather armors, he could not help but ask, how are the quality? Very bad, Manad replied, they are all junk. As expected. Kant shook his head, he casually instructed, use their horses to carry them back. Next time when we come to the Stone Pass, go to the market and get rid of all of them. To us, they are all junk. To those mercenaries and militia, it can be considered good weapons. Yes, Lord. Manad nodded. These weapons and equipment were all standard products. Since Kant had the system, he had no interest. But to ordinary mercenary groups, or even the peasants and armed militia conscripted by night, they were all top-quality goods. One had to know that in this world with low productivity, there were many conscripted peasants summoned by knights, and there more people who just had no weapons but dung forks. Let's move. Kant ordered. This was just a farce on the way back. After packing up the goods, they rode on their horses and continued to advance towards the deeper part of the Naran Desert. However, they had nearly twice as many horses now compared to when they started the trip. The seized goods were also carried by these horses as they moved along the desert, just like a trade caravan heading towards the Oasis Lookout. This was like the prototype of a trade caravan. On the desert outside the stone pass, dozens of naked corpses were lying there. And of course, there was also a beautiful woman who was still wearing a white dress. If one ignored the crossbow arrow between her eyebrows, one might think that she was a noble girl who was enjoying the sun in the desert. It was quiet, gentle, and pitiful. However, the strong smell of blood around her destroyed the tranquility. After half of a day, it was close to noon, and 5 hooded men rode on their horses. They finally discovered the battlefield. After a quick inspection on the battlefield, they were frightened by the scene. They quickly took the woman's corpse and turned their horses around. They ran quickly toward the stone pass along the hidden path and reported what they saw back in their lair. Shortly, the news spread. Most people in the stone pass knew the horrified tragedy. But strangely, there was no any action taken. It was like they were all in hibernation, waiting for the others. Chapter 94, The Storm at the Stone Pass. At the Stone Pass, inside the Baron's mansion. Although it seemed like there was nothing happened, the patrol team was more alert than usual. Baron Dillon was sitting in his living room. He looked annoyed. It was noon, the heat from the Naran desert mixed with his anxiety. He couldn't hide his urge to kill. He had a brutal temper, but he knew how to control it. In front of him, stood the 2 vassal knights that Baron Dillon trusted the most. The 2 of them had just returned from the desert. At the same time, they had brought all the corpses back with carts. The corpses were now placed on an open space outside of the official residence. They announced to the public that these corpses were the soldiers who died in the battle with powerful demonized creatures. The countermeasure to fool the people made Baron Dillon ease a little. He looked at them and said, "I know I can trust 2 of you. Lord Dillon, we've known each other for a long time." The 2 of them lowered their heads and answered humbly. Baron Dillon's eyes looked more gratified. He looked at these 2 comrades who had been with him since they were still peasants. He sighed deeply, his tone became furious. "I believe that you're right. The other vassal knights are all trashed. They came to my place to scrounge for free meals. They even tried to fool me to grant them my villages. They're all bastards who just used me as a stepping stone." The vassal knight didn't know the whole story, but he could roughly get some ideas. The other 4 vassal knights who died in the battle, they have been bragging about Baron Dillon not granted them villages to rule. "Lord, please don't say that." One of the vassal knights tried to dissuade, and he made a gesture pointing outside of the room. These words could not be spread out. However, Baron Dillon slammed the table heavily. "Those 4 trashes went to kill Baron Kant, my dearest nephew. Don't tell me I don't know what their motive is? Isn't it because they want to please that old thing, Viscount Wade? Lord, don't say these words." The other vassal knight also tried to dissuade him. Baron Dillon panted in anger. After he calmed himself, he gritted his teeth and said, "Those damn bastards, that's how they were." The 2 vassal knights kept comforting Baron Dillon. 2 of them looked at each other helplessly and smiled bitterly. In fact, they understood. Princess Sophia's forces and men had always been suppressed, even though they had less power and were once civilian warriors. However, the nobles of the Dukedom of Leo were still afraid of them, and even suppressed them secretly. The nobles would not allow them to possess any power, or even the best fief and vassal knights. When they could backstab others, they would not show mercy. It was normal to see conflict and discord among themselves. No wonder that Baron Dillon was so mad. It had been 10 years since he came to the Stone Pass. He had long been ostracized by the northern counties' noble families. "Lord, what's confusing is we found the members of the Demon's Fang bandit gang." The vassal knight frowned and said, "These guys appeared near the mountain range of Leo and the east of Mountain of Execution. Although their lair is in the northern county, we all know that they will not come to Stone Pass. Why, because we are too poor. Baron Dillon snorted and mocked himself. The vassal knight also shook his head helplessly and said, but it is strange that they appeared in Naran Desert. However, Baron Dillon wasn't bothered by that. He lowered his head slightly and spoke with a hoarse voice, the Demon's Fang bandit gang was formed by Viscount Wade. It seems that this damn old man couldn't hold back anymore. He wants to get his hands on my stone pass. This bandit gang that was active in the northern county, their targets would be the federal territory of the southern county and the countess territory of the eastern county. There were lots of fortunes over there, unlike the northern county which was poor and barren. If it was not for the noble families of the northern county as their backer, this bandit gang will be annihilated many times. In fact, Baron Dillon knew that some of the cavalries in this bandit gang were actually served under the nobles of the northern county as well. After letting out a deep breath, Baron Dillon closed his eyes and said, "Be cautious during the patrols. It seems that people are beginning to infiltrate." "Yes." The two vassal knights lowered their heads and replied. The stone pass was his territory. Baron Dillon would never tolerate anyone interfering in his territory. Especially the table salt trade brought by Kant. Baron Dillon clenched his fists. As long as he could wait and endure the frustration, a large number of silver coins will be in his hands. Then he could gather a large armored troop, even the Viscount Wayne of the northern county couldn't do anything with him. This world was all about strength. Meanwhile, in a wooden house's basement in the slums, the five hooded men placed the body of the beauty in the white dress on the ground. The candle light flickered. The dim light illuminated the beautiful face of the beauty. Big eyes, small red lips, exquisite nose, fair white face, and light green long hair. With her curvaceous and beautiful figure, she was indeed a rare beauty in northern county. But there was a crossbow arrow stuck between her eyebrows. It seemed to be shot at close range, directly piercing through her brow bone and deep into her brain. The leader of the spies limped over. He quietly looked at the dead beauty and said in a regular tone, "Have you cleaned up that place?" He was talking about the desert battlefield. The five hood spies immediately nodded and one of them replied, "They will only know that it was done by the Devil's Fang bandit gang. We didn't leave any traces." "Yes, very good." The leader of the spies nodded. He limped back to his chair and said with regret, "It seems that Miss Jacqueline didn't trick Baron Kant. It's really a waste of years of training." The five hood spies didn't dare to reply and stood upright. "Stay low for the time being. Quietly wait for the order." The leader of the spies waved his hand and said calmly, "If we failed, so be it. It's not a big deal." "Yes." The five spies heard the leader's speech and nodded. They turned around and quickly left the basement. However, when the room quieted down, the spy leader scowled his face in anger. He looked at the corpse on the ground and felt the rage pumped through his veins. Jacqueline was a masterpiece that he had nurtured for more than 10 years. He put in countless efforts to this woman, all for the sake of catching a big fish. But now, she became a corpse, a useless piece of trash. "Baron Kant." The leader of the spies narrowed his eyes and laughed gloomily. "How much more did Princess Sophia leave for you?" He had a wrong idea, just like Baron Dillon. How could a mere Kant, a baron who had been exiled to the deep of the Naran Desert, have such a strong guard cavalry? He was definitely helped by his elders, or even by the hidden forces of the Silver Platter Kingdom. He slowly stood up and limped towards the room next to him. He opened the cabinet and took out the crystal ball. The crystal ball lit up, it continued to report the truth to its master. But the truth it told was deviated. No one knew about the transported, and no one knew about the cheat either. Similarly, no one knew what mount and blade was. A series of misunderstandings had unintentionally formed. Chapter 95, Food in the Posthouse. The horses ran on the sand and formed long, shallow lines. A team of 33 horses marched through the desert. Kant and his team started the way back. 2 Sarandian horsemen led the way, while the others followed. The environment of the Naran desert was harsh, but it was normal for the desert race, Sarandian. They able to navigate using the dune and the sun to make the most correct route, while enduring the extreme heat. They had already traveled far away from the stone pass. After a whole day trip, it was already close to dusk, yet they did not encounter any accidents. This was the Naran desert. It was once a desolate forbidden place of civilization. Even escaped slaves would kill themselves rather than set foot in this cursed land. It was impossible to see a living soul here. Kant reached out his hand to take out the water sack, removed the lid, and poured himself a mouthful of warm water. As his throat was nourished by the water, the tried young man became a little more energetic. "Lord, we will arrive at the post house by 8 o'clock at night." Manad lightly tapped the stirrup, and his horse moved slightly faster. He caught up with Kant and said, "It will be easier once we get to the post house." "Indeed." Kant nodded. Kant squinted his eyes and looked ahead. The vast sea of sand stretched into the sky. This scene seemed vast, and it was a beautiful scene in this desolate land. But in reality, anyone who lived in the desert would understand the cruelness of this land. When Kant arrived for the first time, he truly felt from his heart that he was exhausted. Luckily it's safe now. Kant felt relief in his heart and sighed lightly. He tapped the horse, and his warhorse ran faster. The group heard his voice, "Speed up, all of you. We need to move faster and strive to rest at the post house tonight." "Understood," the cavalries replied. Their speed instantly increased. They were all riding forward, which was much faster than walking. As for the captured horses, they were not as strong as the other three breeds, the Swaldian warhorse, the Salander horse, and the desert horse. They transferred most of the items to stronger horses, so the load of captured horses was reduced, and they can move faster. Kant was thinking that it was time to get more horses. Perhaps it was because of the system's rules. The upgraded cavalry had much better endurance compared to the cavalry in the real world. Just like the Sarandian horsemen. On the basis of a Sarandian horse as the main warhorse, they should add two other horses, which were the horse for carrying loads and the horse for riding. The Swaldian cavalry normally rode an armored warhorse, so they need another two horses for carrying loads, one horse for riding, as well as a warhorse for replacement. In the Middle Ages of Europe, this was how the heavy cavalry was equipped. There were even servants who took care of their daily lives, retinue cavalry that followed them in the war, and a small number of elite footmen that followed them. After all, being able to become a heavy cavalry was equivalent to being a noble. At least they were as rich as a wealthy landlord. It was true that ordinary civilians did not have the money to buy this expensive full-body armor, and they could not afford the warhorse that needed delicate care. Of course, the system did not have so many strict requirements when recruiting and upgrading cavalry soldiers. Their endurance must be much stronger than the regulars. They could refer to the breed line of war horses in recent years for comparison. The endurance, charging speed, and physical strength of the war horses were all top-notch. The augmentation of the system's rules had solved Kant's problem. Think about it, even the transported existed and they were real, so it wasn't hard to accept the support from the system's rule. If he really wanted to equip each cavalry with 3 horses or even 5 horses, then it would be too cumbersome and expensive. Kant was satisfied with it. Of course, with more horses, they could increase their speed, and they can form more efficient tactical attack and tactical shifted. This was just Kant's idea. Perhaps in the future when he gained more power, he would be able to make a deployment like this. Everyone continued to move forward. After the sun in the sky emitted its last light in the dusk, the magnificently bright galaxy had taken over the night sky. The bright moon slowly rose into the sky. The temperature suddenly dropped. The white mist spurted out of their noses and mouths, mixed with the hot air, and condensed into tiny droplets. Kant and the cavalries had already changed their warm woolen sweaters and thicker linen covers during the dinner. They could keep their bodies warm even in the cold desert. They continued their journey. Their warhorse ran through dune after dune. After they climbed over the new dune, a flat sand layer appeared in front of them. Is that? The leader of the Sarandian horsemen raised his head and looked forward. He stared into the distance and saw something unusual. In the middle of the flattened layer, a two-story building stood still. Light shone through the tightly shut doors and windows. Even though they were far away, they could still saw of the flames clearly under the bright starry sky. We've arrived at the posthouse, Kant spoke out everyone's thought. This was precisely the desert area with the underground lake. And that two-story building was the posthouse that Kant built a few days ago. That's great. Manet's lips curled up slightly, and he looked relaxed. Let's go. Kant urged his horse down the dune and led the team charged forward quickly. It was late at night. The construction workers at the posthouse finished their day with work. They were chatting and resting by the fireplace. They didn't fall asleep yet. But soon, they were awakened by the sound of horse hooves. One by one, they instinctively grabbed anything around them and nervously stared at the main door. The continent of Karadia was constantly in chaotic wars. There were bandits and marauders everywhere. Now that they had come to this world, how could they not be nervous when they had a sudden encounter in the middle of the night? Relax, friends of Rodux. Kant pushed the main door, lifted his hood, and said with a smile, "We're not the enemy." "Oh, it's Lord Kant." "Lord Kant, good evening. It's so nice to meet you." "It's you, my lord." Immediately, the construction workers from Variga put down the chairs and wooden sticks in their hands. With their sincere looks, they put their hands on their chests and bowed in embarrassment, trying to apologize for their rude behavior. "It's all right." Kant waved his hand. Of course, he wouldn't care about such a small matter. The cavalries moved the warhorse and the supplies into the posthouse accordingly. After a long day of travel, they were eager to rest. But soon, the atmosphere in the posthouse became lively. "It smells so good." Kant sniffed. He didn't smell it when he first came in because of his freezing nose. But now that he recovered his smell, the entire posthouse was filled with the fragrance of delicious food. "Lord Kant, it's toast, dried sausage, and cabbage soup." The construction workers quickly answered. At the same time, they brought over the tables and chairs for eating and served the freshly cooked food from the grill. Initially, these construction workers were planning to enjoy supper while sitting around the fireplace. It happened that Kant and the others came over with their empty bellies, so they could enjoy these free meals. The construction workers were also willing to offer this food to Kant and the others. "Thank you so much." Kant rubbed his cold face and smiled at them. After riding through the freezing wind for the whole day, their stomach had been empty for a long time. Now that they could eat hot food, and it was like heaven to them. Kant and the others didn't felt ashamed, they sat down and started swallowed up every food quickly to replenish their strength. Late night canteen? Kant could not help but smile. It's fun. Chapter 96, Firentis Principle. After finishing supper, Kant and the others returned to their rooms to sleep. The posthouse was divided into 2 floors. Each room was used as a large bunk, which could accommodate 30 people and allow them to rest. If the spacious living room was included, accommodating 50 people was also definitely possible. If they had opened an inn on a busy commercial road, accommodation at the inn would most likely be full every day, and they would collect so much money their hands would go weak. However, in this civilized desert, the inn could only let Kant and the construction workers rest. Lying on the bed, Kant rested comfortably. He was drowsy. When he woke up the next day, the sky outside was already somewhat bright. Noisy sounds passed through the windows and reached his ears. Listening to the sounds, it should be from the construction workers digging the well. With a hint of laughter, it seemed that the water had already been dug out. Kant got up and quickly put on his clothes. When he went down to the second floor, he found out that the hall was empty. Only then did Kant realize that everyone had gathered at the construction site outside the building. Water is gushing out. Hurry up and use stones to cover the bottom. Don't let the sand sink in. Quick, quick, quick. It's almost done. Give me more stones. It's done. Just build up the walls with the stones. The bottom is already built. The workers were cheering. Clearly, they achieved considerable success. Even Manet and the cavalrymen who were watching nearby applauded. The well is done. Kant walked over. The outlines originally drawn with lime had now become a well. Construction workers climbed out of the well. At the same time, they steadily lay stone bricks to build the well's wall. Under the mysterious support of the system, the well was completed. The mouth of the well even extended beyond the ground for up to half a meter. They also made a water lift out of wood and hemp rope. Lord Kant, the well that you instructed us to build has been completed. The foreman was delighted. Very good. Kant nodded with a smile on his face. The construction workers turned the water lift with all their might and pulled a bucket of well water out from the well. The fresh well water was not muddy at all. It was undoubtedly high-grade underground lake water. The water had been nicely protected by the layers of sand and was not evaporated by the sun, becoming the life-saving water of this desert. Lord, it's all good water. A Sarandian cavalryman took a sip from the bucket. Relaxed, he nodded at Kant and said, "It's drinkable. Replenish the water sacks and make sure the war horses are given enough fresh water." Kant nodded. At the same time, he ordered, "We'll set off later." With this post house and well, there was finally a transit station between the Oasis Lookout and the Stone Pass. One could even argue that, as the salt trade flourishes, another trading village could even be formed here. After all, the Naran Desert was Kant's estate in name. Soon, the water sacks was filled with water. The war horses were also fed with water and fodder, and all preparations had been completed. You can leave at any time after the construction is complete. I will have new personnel come to the post house. Before leaving, Kant also gave instructions to the construction workers. Yes, Lord Kant. The foreman nodded and said apologetically and gratefully, "Lord, please do not forget to pass the letter to Sir Firentis." "Thank you so much." Kant smiled gently and answered, "I won't." After handling matters of the post house, Kant rode his horse towards the north. It would take at least a day to get from here to the Oasis Lookout. However, Kant's heart was a little more complicated. The letter that Firentis' father wanted to pass to Firentis was still in his pockets. Kant was still hesitating. If he lost Firentis, it would mean losing a good general from Swadia. This was, undoubtedly, a huge loss. However, it was an unsolvable situation. Shaking his head and smiling bitterly, Kant sighed. It was just a letter from home. He should just go ahead and hand it to Firentis. If another letter from home came in the future and he was found to have concealed a letter from Firentis' home in the past, the situation would be quite awkward. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Kant's eyes flickered slightly. Moreover, according to Firentis' personality, the current Oasis Lookout was growing. There was a chance that he would choose not to abandon him and go back. After all, Firentis, who had fully embraced and put the knight's code and spirit into practice, was not someone without principle. Trust was also one of Firentis' principles. With mixed feelings, Kant led his team and they galloped across the Naran Desert. After a break at noon, they continued to travel in the afternoon. Finally, they saw the outline of the Oasis Lookout in the evening. This tough and perilous journey was finally over, and it was also a complete success. Before long, Kant and his team's return was discovered by the constantly vigilant sentries. 10 Swadian heavy cavalrymen rushed over from the Oasis Lookout. Their faces were filled with joy under their flat helmets. "Lord Kant, it is truly a joy to see you again. Welcome back." "Thank you," Kant replied with a smile. At the same time, he looked at them, puzzled, and asked, "Where is Knights Firentis?" Knights Firentis is currently leading a team to patrol the northern region. We have recently discovered traces of Jack Allans again. We have already repelled their assaults several times, but they are still constantly ambushing us. It is very troublesome. The reply of the Swadian heavy cavalryman made Kant frown. Jack Allans are actually ambushing and attacking us. Kant was in disbelief. Yes, but the number of Jack Allans isn't high. Each time, there are only dozens of them. We can easily defeat them. The heavy cavalryman's tone was very relaxed, because he had personally killed at least 10 Jack Allans. That beast-like species was simply not an opponent that could withstand a frontal assault of the Swadian heavy cavalryman's attack. Not to mention, there was the godlike flag of war, intimidation. Returning to the Oasis Lookout. It was as peaceful as ever, no different from when Kant left. The only difference was that the Swadian soldiers maintained a higher level of vigilance and patrolled more frequently. This was especially so for the 41 Swadian footmen, who continued to remain on standby status. As for the 20 Ravenstern Rangers, they ate, drank, relieved themselves, and everything else on rooftops. With their archery skills and vigilant personalities, apart from being the first to fight and kill the Jack Allans in close combat, they would shoot and kill the Jack Allans in the desert with their heavy bows. The charred bodies of the Jack Allans were piled on top of each other and were ready to be used on the wheat fields as fertilizers. Lord Kant. Before long, Firentis, who had received the news, rushed back. Some blood stains were on his body. Apparently, he had just been through a battle. Firentis did not hide anything and reported directly, "Those Jack Allans have been attacking us like crazy. This is the second wave that we defeated today. Is it that serious?" Kant frowned. "Yes." Firentis also nodded to Manet and said in a low voice, "There seems to be a change in the north." Kant was silent. His brows furrowed together. He did not expect to receive such bad news the moment he returned to the Oasis Lookout. By the way, Kant seemed to have remembered something. He took a letter out from his pocket and handed it to Firentis in a seemingly normal manner. "This is a letter brought by the construction workers from Veriga. I believe it was commissioned by your father." "Firentis, hurry up and have a look at it." "My father's letter?" Firentis stared at the letter with a stunned expression. Chapter 97, Love from a Father. Firentis lowered his head and looked at the letter in Kant's hand. He had mixed feelings. He had a rather tragic background story. No matter which world it was, brothers killing each other was taboo. Moreover, Firentis, the older brother, had killed his own brother for the sake of a promiscuous courtesan. It went against the knight's code that he once learned and was embodied in his bloodline. Looking at the letter, even though Firentis knew that it was from his father, for a moment, he did not dare to reach out to take it. His heart was filled with fear. Kant looked at Firentis' face and also had mixed feelings. However, his face remained expressionless. With a faint smile, he raised the letter in his hand and placed it in front of Firentis. He nodded encouragingly and said, "My knight, it seems rude of you to leave me holding your letter like this." "I'm sorry, my lord." Firentis came back to his senses and took the letter. "Don't you want to open it?" Kant shrugged and smiled. He said calmly, "This is a letter from a father to his son." Firentis was slightly stunned. Looking at the envelope in his hand, his breathing quickened slightly. He raised his head and looked at the smile on Kant's face. He seemed to have made up his mind. "Yes, this is a letter from my father to me. I have to read it after all." He gently tore open the envelope. However, tears fell from the corners of his eyes. Then, at this moment, a dialogue box popped up on Kant's retina. "Ding, after your hard work, the quest has been successfully completed. Side quest, Firentis' letter has been completed. Quest reward, recruitment doubled, permanent. Introduction, this letter from a father to his son is the embodiment of a father's reluctance to part ways. Time has lessened hatred and dissolved all barriers. This is the love of a father for his son. The dialogue box showed that the quest had been completed. It was originally a side quest from the system. Kant chose to complete it. So that's how it is. Firentis' voice came from the side. His tone was extremely sorrowful. Kant looked over and sighed softly. Firentis. This wandering knight who had once sought redemption was now sobbing like a child. Looking at the familiar handwriting on the letter, Firentis might have found redemption at that moment. Although he could not make up for his past mistakes, his deeds in the continent of Karadia had long reached his father's ears. The letter did not mention much about it, however, it had expressed his father's affirmation of Firentis. However, it was this affirmation that made Firentis, who was still lost and seeking redemption, burst into tears. Someone has been paying attention to the path of redemption that you kept insisting on after all. Kant sighed softly and said to Firentis, I really envy your father. He is a true father. His tone was a little sad. At this moment, an image of Kant himself as an orphan in his previous life and his father in this world, Cameron, appeared in his mind. He could not help but shake his head and say, Then what do you plan to do, Firentis? Kant decided to leave the choice to Firentis and let him decide. Father expressed his appreciation to me for following you. Firentis wiped away the tears on his face. His face, which was still young, had become serious at that moment. Then, he said, I will follow you with a firm conviction. His words were extremely sincere, but this stunned Kant slightly. After hesitating for a moment, Kant asked, Didn't your father ask you to go back? No. Firentis shook his head. He looked a little puzzled, but his expression was serious. My father has his own assistants helping to take care of things. I don't need to go back. In his view, following you is a new beginning, a new future for our family. Okay. Kant nodded and only uttered one word. Kant was a little ashamed now. He actually thought that Firentis would leave after receiving the letter from his family. Moreover, in order to retain Firentis, or at the very least, to hide the letter from Firentis, Kant had made countless plans in his mind. However, at that moment, it seemed that these ridiculous plans and tricks were actually only useful in Kant's own imagination. The strong fatherly love and kinship between Firentis and his father surged into Kant's heart like a dam that had burst and made him extremely uncomfortable. Perhaps Kant thought of his father, the Grand Duke of the Dukedom of Leo, Cameron. Firentis wiped away his tears and solemnly put away the letter. At the same time, he said to Kant with a solemn expression, Lord, my father knows about the difficulties that you are facing now. As such, he mentioned in the letter that a batch of supplies and personnel are on their way over here. He sent them as support to you on behalf of our family. Support? Kant was slightly stunned. That's right. According to the timeline mentioned in the letter, they will be arriving soon. Firentis nodded and explained, My family has gathered 200 peasants willing to come over, as well as 50 Swadian infantry from the family. In addition to that, we have purchased 200 bags of grain, 50 bags of dried meat, and 50 bags of dried sausage. This please help me thank your father. Kant gulped unconsciously after hearing about the number of personnel and resources. Lord, it is also my father's investment in you on behalf of the family. Firentis did not shy away from saying, We believe that, under your leadership, the family will have a new beginning. Regardless, it is still a yeoman's service, Kant said as he exhaled. One had to be cautious when investing. However, Firentis' father did not hesitate and instantly chose to invest in him. Moreover, he invested so much from the beginning. Even if Kant's mentality was great, he was still ecstatic. In terms of resources, there were 200 bags of grain, 50 bags of dried meat, and 50 bags of dried sausage. These were food supplies that could last them months. However, when compared to the 200 peasants and 50 Swadian infantry, it was like a fluorescent light competing against the sun. It simply could not be compared fairly. That was the support that truly shocked Kant and made him truly ecstatic. The appearance of 200 peasants eased the labor shortage in Trondheim. It allowed them to quickly fill various positions. As for the 50 Swadian infantry, they were the equivalent of heavy cavalry, a fourth-level troop class. This would bring the quality of troops in the Oasis Lookout to a new level. The reason was that the combat strength of these fourth-level troop class infantry soldiers was much stronger than the Swadian footmen, which was a third-level troop class. They were several times stronger. In terms of the troop class of the Kingdom of Swadia, these two troop classes were extremely important. If the Swadian heavy cavalry was the spear for offense, then the Swadian infantry was the shield for defense. The spear thrust out, and the shield defended. Together with the Swadian heavy crossbowmen, these troop classes formed the Kingdom of Swadia's complete battle sequence. While Kant did not have any Swadian heavy crossbowmen, he had the even stronger fifth-level troop class, the Ravenstern Rangers. This powerful troop class that wielded heavy bows could completely act as a counterattack force during defense, using those conical arrowheads to kill any enemy in an instant. "Lord, there's a team approaching from the east." On the watchtower, the sentry in charge of surveillance immediately poked his head out of the tower. Then, he pointed to the east, and shouted, "There are at least 250 people." The Swadian heavy cavalrymen, who were already on alert, quickly assembled. However, Kant's expression was calm. Of course, he knew what was going on. He knew that this 250-man team was, in fact, a group that Firentis' father had gathered in Sunno, and was part of his investment in Kant. They came very quickly. Kant smiled, gesturing to the assembled heavy cavalrymen not to worry. At the same time, he looked at Firentis before nodding. Then, he said, "Since they are from Sunno, Firentis, you should be quite familiar with them. Come and welcome them for me. You can do it." "Of course." Firentis nodded firmly. After bowing, he got on his horse and led the team to welcome them. It was a mission from Kant. It was also his trust. Investment, very good. Kant gently clenched his fist while a smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. As expected of a military noble house of Sunno. After making up his mind, he simply sent the investment over without any hesitation. As a transported, Kant understood that, in the game, even just 50 Swadian infantry was considered extremely valuable. Sometimes, during a tragic war between nations, one might not even be able to gather this many infantrymen. Even after the game world had turned into the real world, their value was still just as high. Chapter 98. The Fortress of Oasis Lookout, First Order in 10,000 words. Fathis soon returned, followed by Sunno's team. Among the 200 peasant, there were 5 carriages full of supplies. Under the tarpaulin, sacks were piled up. They were the grains, dried meat, and dried sausage that they had purchased in Sunno. They were all food that could be stored conveniently. When they arrived at Oasis Lookout, they all looked at this small oasis curiously. However, the 50 Swadian infantry that were accompanying them were much calmer. They formed a formation and stood upright. These were all outstanding warriors who had experienced many battles. One could tell just by looking at their equipment. Everyone was wearing infantry chain armor similar to the heavy cavalry. They wore flat-topped helmets. However, they did not wear cloaks as they specialized in combat. Instead, they wore a layer of nail-studded leather armor on the outer layer of the infantry chain armor. It was used to prevent long-range arrows from piercing through the armor plates, as well as knife and sword attacks from close-range enemies. It could indeed be called a heavy footman just by relying on defense. In the battle sequence of the Swadian troops, their role was to resist the enemy troops head-on and maintain the stability of the front line. They held up the heater shield, which was embedded with nails on the iron edge of their left arm, and held tightly onto the hand and half swords that were meticulously crafted by the blacksmiths. In front of the overwhelming charge of the heavy cavalry, they were the reliable guarantee of firmly defending the defensive line. Kant looked at these Swadian infantry soldiers with satisfaction, who were still in high spirits after a long journey. They are elites worthy of recognition. Kant nodded to himself. And with the addition of these 50 Swadian infantry, the troops of Oasis Lookout were basically formed. An infantry formation of 50 infantry, 41 light infantry, an archer formation of 20 Ravenstone Rangers, 46 Swadian heavy cavalry, and light cavalry such as desert bandits that could be recruitable at any time. It could be said to be a standard combat sequence. Although the current army was still around 200 people. But the actual combat strength was more than 10 times more than when Kant used low-level soldiers to conquer the world. Fate, Kant said. Fate, who had already recovered his determination, quickly walked over. Lord, please give me your orders. Kant smiled and looked at the sorrow that had disappeared from his face. He nodded and said, then you will lead the team and familiarize yourself with our current environment. If you encounter Jack Allen who are trying to ambush us, you will be responsible for commanding the battle. Understood, Lord Kant. Firentis nodded and took over the command without any hesitation. After receiving the letter from his father, he seemed to have undergone a complete transformation and successfully transformed into a true noble knight. He had gone through strict training since he was young and had gone through hard training on the mainland. He was a military commander who could take charge of his own affairs. Firentis gathered the troops in Oasis Lookout and at the same time, put these 50 Swadian infantry into the ranks and led the team to set off. It was Kant's trust and recognition that allowed Firentis to lead the troops. At the same time, it was Kant's training and expectation for Firentis. After all, Kant knew that although he could command a small number of troops, as the number of troops increased, a professional commander would be more effective in controlling the troops. As he stepped forward, the metal plates collided like clear wind chimes. Kant was slightly intoxicated. This was the whisper of war, a unique display of strength. Opening his eyes, Kant looked at the 200 peasants who were still curiously sizing up the place. He smiled and said, "All right, my dear subjects, now is the time to be busy. You will get your jobs and your house. You will live well here. Long live my lord." The peasant immediately cheered. They had given up on Sunno and came here for a better future. Of course, the first job of the new arrival was to move all the materials they brought to the storeroom. 50 bags of dried meat and 50 bags of dried sausage. This kind of meat that could endure storage and was delicious and could quickly replenish one's strength was a good thing, especially the dried sausage. Kant, who was used to eating dried meat, could not help but want to taste this delicacy. Move these 200 sacks of grain to the mill. Kant directed the peasant to work and pointed to the warehouse in the southeast. There is a grain warehouse there. Yes, Lord. The peasant immediately began to work diligently. The mill in the southeast, which was built separately on the sand, had reached the end stage after the workers' efforts over the past few days. The warehouse that stored grain and flour had also been built as an additional building. However, the style of the mill was different from the wind and hydraulic mills that were common in the Kingdom of Swadia. This was a common animal-powered mill in the Kingdom of Saran Sultanate. Although compared to the wind and hydraulic mill, the animal-powered mill was less efficient. However, the animal-powered mill was not limited by the terrain. It did not need to be built beside a river or between windy mountain passes. Kant understood that the system must have considered the lack of water and wind in the Naran desert. Otherwise, if those two kinds of mills really appeared, it would be really embarrassing. Bags of grain were transported over. The construction workers also helped. Just now, with the final wooden board finalized, the mill had been completed. Including the city wall. A half-meter high stone wall made of brick-sized stones was built around the date palm jungle and wheat fields. This was Kant's last resort. The city wall did not have much meaning. It was the lowest grade building with a cost-effective ratio. If Kant hadn't upgraded the entire village, he wouldn't have even considered building this building. It would have been a waste of dinar. Kant had even decided. As long as the level up of the village was completed, he would immediately tear down the city wall. There were no beasts in the Naran desert, and the half-meter-high city wall couldn't stop the Jack Allen who wanted to flip over. Rather than hindering Kant's troops from blocking the sneak attacks of the Jack Allen and hindering the tactical attack, it was better to tear down all of them. After all, Kant would continue to develop agriculture in the future, and he could not let the city wall restrict the land and space. Lord Monide, who had finished arranging the horses and supplies, walked over. Yes. Kant turned his head to look. What is it? According to Firentis, our salt mine has been occupied by the Jack Allen again? Monide frowned slightly. This was related to the development of the table salt trade in the future. If the table salt could not be delivered to the Stone Pass as scheduled, the seemingly peaceful but in fact bad-tempered Baron Dillon Nanja would probably turn hostile again. That's right. Kant nodded and did not deny it. He only frowned slightly and said, "It's not a big problem." "I think we should solve this problem quickly," Monide warned. "Although business requires skill, this skill is not cunning and deception, but honesty. I understand this principle." Kant sighed slightly and turned his head to look at the desert in the north, frowning even more. The Jack Allen that had already been defeated and scattered actually dared to harass him, and even occupied the salt mine and the tribal ruins. It really made him feel that these guys had eaten the heart of a wolf and had the guts of a leopard. They were really bold. Just clean it up again. Kant snorted coldly, his eyes full of killing intent. Kant didn't care about those small groups of Jack Allen at all. After being completely defeated, even the tribe was burned to ashes, the Jack Allen in the Naran desert couldn't be considered as a match. The current sneak attack was only the last struggle before death. It didn't even pose much of a threat. Due to Fathis staying behind to guard the Oasis Lookout and carefully defending the surrounding dune day and night, it was basically slaughtering the Jack Allen that had been defeated once again, letting these pitiful worms that had lost their tribe scattered in the desert go to the underworld to reunite with their families. Perhaps some Jack Allen would return to the ruins of the tribe and use the fresh water from the well to form a gathering place again. But Kant's sweep would start again. This time, he would not lead the low-level infantrymen who might be in danger of losing the battle to launch a surprise attack. Instead, he would lead the genuine cavalry to charge forward and completely defeat the Jack Allen once again. He would kill these low-level uncivilized beast races in the Naran desert. Because Kant had already changed his weapons, his troops had also completed their level up, and they had the ability to recruit a pure cavalry unit. Use the card. Kant's mind moved slightly. The golden card that was floating in his mind instantly turned to dust with Kant's mind. This was the reward for completing the side quest Firentis' letter of home. Double the number of recruits, constant. This was the reward for this quest. From Kant's point of view, this was the reason for the rapid recruitment of pure cavalry troops. Without a doubt, he could rely on this golden card to complete the construction of the cavalry troops in a short period of time. Ding system prompt. Please choose the constant building, Council Hall/Desert Bandits Camp. The system gave a prompt. Kant did not hesitate at all and said in a deep voice, Desert Bandits Camp. Ding system prompt. Permanent success, the recruitment effect of this building has doubled. Desert Bandits Camp, the current number of recruits is 20 desert bandits per week. The system dialog box popped up and then disappeared in his vision. Kant slightly clenched his fist. That's it. Because when he opened the recruitment interface of the Desert Bandits Camp, the interface that had once shown recruitable 10/10ths Desert Bandits had now changed to show the number of recruitable 10/20ths Desert Bandits. Recruitable 10 Desert Bandits. It was already the weekend today, Kant would not waste these 10 quotas. After paying 300 dinar, the 10 Desert Bandits immediately walked out of the camp with their desert horses. Although their weapons and equipment were seriously outdated, they looked extremely thin and pitiful beside the Swadian man-at-arms. However, their temperament as seasoned bandits still remained, as if they were terrifying bandits who could go berserk at any time. These desert bandits were originally light cavalry soldiers who came and went without a trace, using tactical diversion and charging as an advantage. However, Kant still had to make some changes. Use the military card. The dialog box popped up in his vision again. Kant chose. The data stream instantly began to spread. On the waist of these desert bandits, the flanged mace, which was originally a close combat weapon, disappeared into thin air. What reappeared was the scimitar that Sarandon people were used to. This was a genuine standard weapon, and not the flanged mace, which was cheap and easy to mass-produce. Outside the impregnable stone pass, the mission reward obtained from annihilating the 2 waves of enemies with ulterior motives. It happened to be perfectly matched. It's done. Kant looked at the streamlined scimitar at his waist, and the corners of his mouth curled up into a smile. 5 Sarandian horsemen led a team of 20 desert bandits. They used their spears and scimitars to sweep through the jack-allen hiding among the dune. There was absolutely no problem, even if there were a lot of enemies. They used javelins to wear down the enemies from afar, lure them, and divide them, then, they would destroy them. These desert races were all good at this. This tactic was the Kujit people's specialty. But when the Sarandon from the desert and the Kujit people on the grassland fought, they also learned this tactic. There was only a difference. The Kujit people were good at using bow and arrow to harass the enemy. They would harass the enemy until they were exhausted before concentrating their strength to launch an attack. The Sarandon, on the other hand, were more interested in the destructive short javelins, which directly caused the enemy to suffer a great loss. They brazenly used the enemy's timid mentality to launch a charge, completely crushing the enemy. This was a different tactic displayed by the different characteristics of the 2 nations. There was no good or bad, only whether it was suitable or not. The Sarandon rode a desert horse. Its hooves were wide and its body was well proportioned. Its physique was also relatively strong, but its endurance was poor. It was a horse that was suitable for direct charging rather than wandering. The Sarandon horse was a military horse that had been carefully nurtured by the desert horse. As a result, the Sarandon threw short javelins and instantly destroyed the enemy's formation. They charged forward with their horses' pilum. The effect was extremely good. In the Naran desert, Kant of course used the tactics of these desert nations. This was the experience accumulated by the ancestors. Just like in future wars, Kant's Swadian troops were perfectly in formation. However, these Sarandon desert bandits were like flies that harassed the enemy's flanks and rear. Once the enemy revealed a flaw, they would be welcomed, would be complete death. This was because the flood formed by the Swadian man-at-arms could destroy all the troops in front of them. The next thing is to wait. Kant calculated in his heart. All the buildings would be completed today. After meeting the system's criteria for upgrading the village of Trondheim, Kant would choose to level up directly. That would be a new beginning, not the village of today. For example, the fortress that Kant intended to level up. When any force went from weak to strong, it was accompanied by a series of battles and fights. Moreover, this was a world where hard fists represented justice. Only by possessing strong military strength could one ensure one's own safety. Kant could not possibly devote all his resources to economic development in the early stages. The path he had set in advance was military development first. It could also be said that Kant's development path was militaristic. That's right, militaristic. In Kant's view, this was not a derogatory term, but the fastest growth in strength, the best effect, and the shortest effect. With military strength, it meant that the fist was hard. As long as the fist was hard and others did not dare to easily invade, then Kant could develop the economy without worry. These troops were all recruited by the system and were always loyal to Kant. There was no military interest group that opposed Kant's economic development. They would only support him unconditionally. Kant turned his head slightly. The sun in the sky had already reached the top of his head, emitting an incomparable heat. It was almost noon. Taking a deep breath, Kant's expression was calm, but there was a hint of complacency in his eyes. He swept his gaze across the Oasis Lookout. As the sun rises from the east, Kant sighed in his heart. This was already a small-scale village for him, the cornerstone of his glorious future. The darkness was condensing, as if it was trying its best to contain the light of dawn. But as the blazing sun finally took shape, the darkness was like a broken flag in front of the light. In a short moment, countless rays of light pierced through the darkness, dispersing the night, and the dawn that belonged to the day arrived. Kant opened his eyes. The sky outside the window was still slightly dark. Shaking his head, he quickly recovered his spirit. He lifted the wool blanket and put on his clothes before opening the door and walking downstairs. Lord Kant. The guards guarding the first floor had been replaced by the Swadian infantry, who were better at fighting on foot. When they saw Kant come out, they stopped their chests in high spirits and saluted him. Yes. Kant nodded in response. Sitting on the wooden table in the hall, the peasant in the kitchen was preparing breakfast. It was still the food portion for all the people, and they needed to prepare it earlier. Kant was not surprised by this. He just turned his head and asked the Swadian infantry who acted as the guards, "Did you notice anything unusual last night?" "Lord Kant, everything is safe." The Swadian infantry replied with certainty. "Very good." Kant nodded with a smile on his face. After midnight this morning, Kant took the opportunity to spend 600 dinar to directly recruit 20 desert bandits during the recruitment period of the desert bandits camp, forming a 40-man light cavalry team. Kant did not let them stay idle. Instead, he arranged a mission. Led by 5 Sarandian horsemen, they took advantage of the night to sweep the dune around the Oasis Lookout. Now it seemed that the effect was remarkable. "No Jack Allen attack?" Kant still asked. "No." The Swadian infantry answered, and added, "Absolutely safe. There is no trace of Jack Allen around the village." "Not bad." Kant smiled in satisfaction. The role of the light cavalry was not only to harass the enemy's front line and attack the enemy's supply line. They could also learn and use tactics such as anti-reconnaissance, anti-sneak attack, and anti-infiltration. It was quite convenient, fast, and efficient. Sometimes, it was more useful than the heavy cavalry used to simply destroy the enemy's formation. However, Kant still shook his head somewhat regretfully. When he had the desert bandits form a cavalry team to clean up the surroundings of the dune, he had also told them that if they could capture Jack Allen, they would try their best to capture them. After all, these guys could be sold to the Shivadan caravan that was coming this month. As for replacing the flanged mace, Kant did not feel regretful. In the game, this kind of blunt weapon could indeed forcefully stun the enemy and obtain a large number of captives. However, in the real world, when the desert bandits used the horse-speed hammer to hit the head, it was basically like a watermelon being hammered open. It would be fine if the skull was fractured, but most of it would be directly sent flying, causing the entire head to split into pieces, not to mention stunning them. The unlucky look on their faces was simply unbearable to look at. This was also the reason why Kant had them change into scimitars. They were all killers. The sharp scimitars were much stronger than the flanged mace, which had a shorter attack range. Kant did not care. If they could capture the Jack Allen, they could capture them. If they could not, they could kill them all. There were no hard targets. Right now, the development of Oasis Lookout was still the most important. Killing all the Jack Allen wouldn't be a problem. Sitting in the council hall, the sun became thicker. The night had completely disappeared. It was time for the day. Kant was waiting. The system also thoughtfully popped up the dialog box. Ding as the morning sun rise, a new week begins. Income, you collect 200 dinar in Trondheim, village. Expenditure, you pay 4,766 dinar to the entire army. Financial summary, the main income is 200 dinar head tax for civilians in Trondheim, no taxes paid by businessmen, no taxes paid by factories, the means of income is seriously lacking. The main expenses are military expenses, 369 dinar for the Swadian infantry, 800 dinar for the Swadian infantry, 1,472 dinar for the Swadian heavy cavalry, 145 dinar for the Sarandian horsemen, 240 dinar for the desert bandits, and 1,540 dinar for the Swadian man-at-arms. Fateh 100 dinar, Monide 100 dinar. This was the weekly income and expenditure report. Kant's gaze swept across the financial summary of the retina. It was almost the same as what he had calculated in advance. One of the disadvantages of using military force was that military expenditure would consume more than half of the savings. But Kant did not care. Now that he had determined the current development path of military priority, he naturally would not change it. In this world, Jack Allen were scattered everywhere. Not to mention the depths of the Naran Desert, there were also many Jack Allen tribe in the Sinway range. Capturing some for dinar was really simple and easy. After checking the finances, Kant's eyes shone. What he had to do next. But before that, Kant had to be fully prepared. After a moment of silence, Kant looked up at the guard at the door and ordered, "Pass down the order, ask Firentis to gather the Svaldia troops as soon as possible and set up a defense in the Oasis Lookout. Monide will be the assistant." "Understood, Lord." The guard immediately replied and left after bowing. Not long after, the sound of footsteps and the neighing of horses could be heard outside the council hall. Kant passed down the order and all the Swadian troops began to gather and wait for orders. This was the strongest military strength Kant possessed at the moment. Even the Jack Allen tribe back then would probably tremble at such a powerful force and would not dare to offend them easily. 41 Swadian footmen and 50 Swadian infantry. 46 Swadian man-at-arms and 20 Ravensden rangers. As well as the light cavalry that was still wandering in the desert outside with 5 Sarandian horsemen and 40 desert bandits. A strong elite made up of 202 people. They were all high-level soldiers that could directly fight on the battlefield. Among them, the lowest troop class were all Swadian footmen who wore mail armor and mail armor. They were standard soldiers with heater shield, heavy spear, and Germanic short sword on their waists. Kant thought it was foolproof. Oasis Lookout was safe now. It was also a good time to level up. Kant's thought process was straightforward. He chose the golden card in his mind. Level up. Kant confirmed that the golden card in his mind was instantly shattered. A mysterious power descended. The request for level up that had been rejected previously now appeared in Kant's retina once again. In order to see the dialog box clearly, Kant closed his eyes. Ding system prompt. Currently, the equipment of the village Trondheim is complete. Level up is allowed. Yes/no level up. The system gave a choice, but Kant would not hesitate at this moment. Taking a deep breath, Kant said with certainty, "Level up." The words represented affirmation, and Kant's tone was equally affirmative. The golden light that had already dispersed into fragments instantly turned into a stream of data, appearing in the outside world with Kant's will. The entire council hall was wrapped up. A large number of data chain began to intertwine, and a mysterious existence was descending. As if he had broken some sort of crystal wall and communicated with two kinds of rules, Kant, who was in the council hall, also transformed into this mysterious force and began to transform the council hall, as well as injecting new rules into it. Ding system prompt. The village has reached the level up standard. There are 2 modes to choose from for this level up. 1 fortress, military, /2 town, economic. Please make a reasonable choice based on the current situation. Once confirmed, there will be no way to change it. The system dialog box popped up in Kant's eyes. Kant broke away from that mysterious power. He swallowed his saliva slightly and made a choice. Fortress. Ding system prompt. The mode has been confirmed as fortress. The village has begun to level up. The data stream continued to spread. It seemed to be permanent, but it only lasted for a few seconds. The data stream that completely covered the council hall was fierce when it came, but it disappeared in the blink of an eye. Kant, who was sitting on the chair, opened his eyes. Is it over? Slowly exhaling, Kant looked in front of him. What greeted his eyes was still a long table, which seemed to be no different from before. But when Kant raised his head to look at the decorations on both sides, he could not help but squint his eyes. The change was really too big. The neatly cut stones were like green bricks, laid out neatly into the floor of the council hall. The surrounding walls were no longer made of wooden planks, but stone instead. The width was like the stone used to build the city wall. The engineers measured it neatly and built it layer by layer, making the height of the entire hall reach 4 meters. And for the sake of beauty, there was a lion flag hanging on the wall that symbolized the kingdom of Swadia. This was also in line with the aesthetic standards and logo of the Dukedom of Leo. Kant looked at the image of the Dukedom of Leo after living in the Dukedom of Leo for 16 years. He thought that there was nothing wrong with these flags that represented the Dukedom of Leo. Although the drawing of the lions was different, they all represented the lions. Kant turned his head to look at both sides. The originally spacious and open windows had disappeared. The 4-meter-high stone wall had no concept of windows at all. This caused the light to be a little dim. This made Kant slightly stunned. He subconsciously thought of the stone pass, Baron Dillon Nanju's official residence. It was really very similar. The rooms on both sides were already blocked by the walls. Only the corners of the walls on both sides where Kant was sitting had 2 passages that were connected to an unknown place. Similarly, there were 2 Swadian infantry soldiers guarding each of them. Just like the 2 infantry soldiers in front of the door, they were standing guard. Kant stood up and walked towards the passageway on the left. He was deep in thought. Is it leading upstairs? According to his experience in the game in his previous life, the fortress buildings in the Kingdom of Swadia were usually multi-storied. Moreover, looking at the council hall that was now completely made of stone, it was estimated that there were more floors and the buildings were taller. Lord Kant. The Swadian infantry on guard saluted respectfully. Yes. Kant nodded in response. Entering the passage, as Kant had expected, was a staircase made of wooden planks in the 2-storied walls, leading directly to the top. However, looking up, it seemed that the council hall had become 3 stories. The space on the 2nd floor was relatively small. Both sides of the corridor were separated by wooden boards. It was similar to the layout of a hotel in the game. It was obviously a room for the guards. At the same time, it was also a storeroom. Although it looked small, it could probably accommodate 20 guards. Kant continued up the stairs to the 3rd floor. This should be the space of a lord. There were only 3 rooms separated by wooden planks. The interior space was very spacious. Moreover, there were many decorations hanging on the walls and carpets on the floor. They were all typical of the style of the Svaldians. They were luxurious and had a graceful and domineering aura. The aura of the former overlord of the continent of Karadia was undoubtedly revealed. Not bad. Kant nodded. He checked the room. There were also carpets and ornaments inside. The bed was also covered with soft velvet. In the game, this was a precious cloth. However, Kant raised his head and found that the stairs were still leading to a higher place. He walked over curiously. There was a wooden door at the top. As he pushed it open, the bright and sunny sunlight instantly shone down. Kant could not help but squint his eyes slightly. He immediately turned around and walked out. This was a small house made of stone, similar to the elevator room on the top floor. Lord Kant. He respectfully called out. It was the 2 Ravenstone Rangers bowing. Kant's eyes adapted to the light, squinting at his surroundings. He could see the vast desert in the distance. The vast sea of sand was incomparably vast. The desolation that belonged to the desert stunned him. This was the top floor of the council hall. The stone roof had turned into a floor under his feet. There was a spacious space of about 400 square meters. At the edge of the room, there was a half-meter-high arrow-blocking wall. It was concave and jagged. It could also allow archers to shoot from a high vantage point. "How high is this place?" Kant swallowed his saliva and asked. The Ravenstone Ranger replied, "Lord, it's 10 meters high." Kant came to the side of the arrow-blocking wall and looked down. Looking down from above made his heart beat faster. Although he was not afraid of heights, his fear of heights still made his heart palpitate. The originally familiar street appeared in front of Kant. The area of the council hall had changed from 300 square meters to 400 square meters now. Moreover, it was 10 meters high. It was like a stone giant that crushed all the buildings at the bottom. They hesitated to level up the council hall, and the streets also changed a little. But the overall effect was similar to usual. Firentis was leading his troops to gather on the streets and wait for orders. When they saw Kant looking down, all of them revealed fanatical expressions and raised their weapons as they cheered. "Lord Kant!" This was their heartfelt fanatical respect for Kant, their heartfelt worship and loyalty from the soul. And at this moment, Kant's heart seemed to be ignited with pride. Standing at the edge of the arrow-blocking wall, he waved at the soldiers below. Although he did not say anything, this response caused all the soldiers of Svaldia to cheer. "This is my fortress." Kant narrowed his eyes, his heart filled with incomparable confidence. After the upgrade, although it seemed that the village's basic council hall had been changed to a fortress level up, the council hall was now a fortress level up. But this was only one of them. Kant opened his retina and looked at the current Trondheim interface. It was completely different. A fortress-type building had appeared. This was a new beginning. Kant left the top floor, and the two Ravenstone Rangers bid him farewell. They were the sentinels stationed here. At the same time, they could also rely on their heavy bows to launch long-range attacks against any enemy who tried to approach the Oasis Lookout. With a height of 10 meters and the archery skills of the Ravenstone Rangers, they could completely cover the entire Oasis Lookout. Kant trusted these rangers who had been honed in the Misty Mountains. Returning to the hall on the first floor, Kant sat back in his seat. "Open the data list." Kant's mind communicated with the system again. The current data list popped up on his retina. Trondheim. Lord, Kant. Balance, 3,534 dinars. Reputation, 1,200. Honor, 0. General, Fathis, Monide. Type, Svaldia Fortress. Current population, 200. LSB Building Council Hall, Fortress Level Houseus, 6 buildings Watchtower Deserts Bandits Dites Camp, Groceries Sugaru Workshop, Training Ground, Me Wall, Water Well, Post House. Constructions available: House, Barracks, Stables, Bell Tower, City Wall, City Gate, Arrow Tower, Weapons Workshop, Prison Cell. Level Up, Watchtower, Training Ground. Construction Pack, Stone City Wall. Agricultural Resources, Date Palm Jungle, 2 mu, Wheat Field, 7.5 mu, GG Grass Beach, 5 mu. Animal Husbandry, Single Humped Camel, 10. Fighting Force Summary, 91 Infantry, 91 Cavalry, 20 Archers. Current Troops, Swadian Infantry, 41, Swadian Infantry, 50, Swadian Heavy Cavalry, 46, Sarandian Horsemen, 5, Desert Bandits, 40, Ravenstone Ranger, 20. Recruitable, Swadian Recruit, Council Hall. Desert Bandits Camp. Comment: the brand new Trondheim Fortress has just been established, and the situation looks a little bad. The clear spring water converges into the small lake, moistening the dry and barren land. Peasant with hope are busy in date palm jungle and the fields. However, as a fortress, there were fewer buildings, and the living area was rather crowded. There were no fortifications. It was worth noting that there were no ladies in the fortress. Remark: non-system generated items are not included in the statistics. This was the newly upgraded Trondheim fortress. Kant let out a breath and could not help but smile bitterly. The system's comment is really merciless. As a village, the comment was still good, but now it was directly defined as bad. Looking at the densely arranged categories on the interface, Kant could not help but accept this comment. After all, according to the statistics of the large number of military buildings on the interface, the current fortress was indeed very simple. To be called a fortress, it had to at least have a wall that could protect the estate. Just like those castles in the game in his previous life. However, now that the village had been upgraded to a fortress, the construction time of the buildings had gone from 7 days to 20 or 50 days. It had doubled. This made Kant feel lucky that he didn't use up all of his reputation. However, the city wall can be built. Kant's eyes flashed. This was the construction pack that he had drawn before. He did not directly build the city walls back then because he was afraid of hindering the development and construction of the village. Now that he thought about it, it was still wise. If he had really chosen to build the city walls back then the appearance of the fortress building now would have completely disrupted the original plan. The importance of the fortress planning could be reflected in the defensive effect. If the city walls and defensive structures were not built properly, and there were blind spots and gaps in the defenses, it would be fatal to the fortress. After all, this was a military building. The key to defending an area was that if the defenses were lowered because of the planning problem, and a gap appeared, the enemy would find it and use it as an opening to launch a fierce attack. Then, it was only a matter of time before the fortress fell. There was no such situation at the moment. All the fortress-level buildings had formed a list. Kant could completely rely on the buildings in the list and leave room for construction in advance. This meant that there was no problem in building the stone walls now. Build the stone walls. Kant's mind continued to communicate with the system. Since he had made up his mind, Kant would carry out the plan swiftly. Sloppiness was not his character. In his mind, the card of the stone wall was instantly shattered into pieces. The data flow was given new rules by the mysterious power. Kant's entire body also rose with the divergence of his thoughts. By the time he reacted, he had already appeared at the height of 20 meters above the Trondheim fortress from the perspective of God. From a high vantage point, he could clearly see his own fortress. The entire council hall, which was made of stone, should be called a square tower. The height of 10 meters was like a rock giant. On the street at the bottom, Firentis and his troops were still gathered and waiting for orders. However, on the street of the council hall, they were like small black dots. They were not directly proportional to this huge rock giant. They seemed extremely small, as if they could be completely annihilated with a single kick. Of course, this was just a figment of Kant's imagination. Kant was amused by his own thoughts. He shook his head slightly. Kant regained his rationality and scanned the current layout of the Oasis Lookout. It was still mainly agriculture in the north, and mainly residential and handicraft industries in the south. This was the simple plan of the village, but it was a good foundation. Kant did not plan to change the agricultural area in the north. Kant also decided on the residential area and the crafts area in the south. The weapons workshop in the list of buildings was also placed in the crafts area by Kant, and it was also placed in the south. The west side was a small lake and 5 acres of Achnatharum splendens. Kant planned to develop the west side into a livestock area. In the future, all kinds of livestock would be raised there, and the fertilizer produced could be transferred to the agricultural area. It was basically killing 2 birds with 1 stone. As for the other similar cells and barracks, Kant planned to place them all on the east side. Next to the pre-built training ground, there was also a spacious and empty sand land. These buildings could be spread out for military purposes. In the future, if anything happened, they could also provide timely support. No matter how the fortress was planned, it would not be too big. The close-knit buildings were linked together. With the city walls as the boundary, they could firmly resist the enemy's attack and ensure the lord's ownership of this area. This was the definition of a fortress or castle. In the dukedom of Leo, castles and villages were the noble and knights' fiefdoms. As for towns and cities, they belonged to the exclusive territory of the king. It was necessary to send officials to the city hall to govern. Of course, Kant only had this fortress at present, so there was no need to worry. Chapter 99, Kant's Coercion. And so, Kant finished the zoning of Oasis Lookout. The agricultural area in the north, the livestock area in the west, the resident and craft area in the south, and the military zone in the east. The construction of the stone walls would proceed according to these four areas. Kant thought of establishing a trading zone, but he not to. After all, in the future, the trading activities with the system will fully rely on the grocery stores. There was no need to let the natives of this world enter the fortress during the trading. In order to keep the location of the salt mine a secret, Kant planned to set up the trading area in the posthouse. Not a single trade caravan could enter the Oasis Lookout. If they wanted to trade table salt, they could only do so at the posthouse. If there were people up to no good and tried to inspect the truth, they will be executed if they ignored the warning. As the Lord, Kant was not bound to any laws and he could kill civilians. Was everyone equal before the law? Impossible. This statement was like a joke to the nobles. Moreover, such a statement was meaningless in this world, as the bloodline and the social class were highly valued. Perhaps there was another saying. The law was the friendly assistant of the nobles to rule. It was the true interpretation of the law. This was particularly true for Kant. As a baron, although he was far away from the dukedom of Leo, he had his own territory. He was more like a ruler who was far away from all those authorities. He could issue decrees or set rules on his own. After finished the zoning, Kant had a plan in his mind. His thoughts flew. The data flow that floated in his mind instantly manifested into real substance and emerged at the Oasis Lookout. The stone material for the wall was cut from the massive rock. The stone wall was rapidly forming and extending, separating the spring water from the agricultural area in the north. The water channels that were previously built were also cut off. The stone wall even extended from the east of the lake and the street entrance of the sugar workshop to the south. After extending to the desert, the new open space could be used for new houses. Then, the wall turned a sharp 90 degrees. From the training ground and the mill, the extending wall connected to another end of the wall where spring water was. The stone wall seemed to have formed a standard rectangular shape. This the rectangular fortress as he planned. The entire Trondheim was protected by the city wall and separated the spring water from the lake. Although the city wall had passageways connected to the lake and the spring water, these narrow holes were too narrow that only ducks, geese, and other small animals were able to drill in and out. This was to secure the water demand of the fortress. Even if they were surrounded by a large number of enemies, the troops could still use the spring water inside the city wall for replenishment. Moreover, the small lake was only about 30 meters wide. If the enemies wanted to replenish the lake water, they would have to face the threat of the archers on the city wall. Every time the enemies want to replenish the water for their army, they would have to pay a certain price. Although the enemies could replenish the lake water, it was actually the trap by Kant to lurk them in. Ding system prompt. This time, the stone city wall can build 2 additional city gates. Please choose the location of the city gates to build. Kant's mind was still in God's view. The system popped up a dialog box. However, Kant was already prepared. With just a thought, a 6-meter-tall, 4-meter-wide stone gate appeared in the east military area, and the residence and crafts area on the south side. The gate was made up of 20 centimeters thick wooden panels that were nailed together. It was further reinforced by iron boards that were embedded in it. The defensive effect of the gate was great. At this point, the construction of the city walls had been completed. Whew! Kant slowly opened his eyes and let out a long breath. He returned from God's view. He was still sitting on his chair, in front of a long table. It was felt like he had just ascended into the sky and his soul had completely left his body. This was, of course, the power of the system. In the council hall, which had already converted into a military tower, there were pine oil torches on the walls. The torches brought light to the dark surrounding, one could barely see things in the hall. An increase in the defensive effect also caused a decrease in the comfort level. There were a gain and a loss. Kant stood up and walked outside. The two Swadian footmen who were guarding the door were still the two who were guarding the entrance of the council hall. When they saw Kant coming over, they immediately straightened their chests and released vigorous energy. "My lord, my respects to you." The two of them saluted at the same time. "Very good." Kant nodded. The two of them stretched out their hands politely and pushed the heavy wooden door open. Kant walked in. The troops of Firentis and Swadian were still waiting for orders. Everyone was quiet, but they were in high spirits. The elites released an aura that can condense the air. Even Kant had seen the strongest knight troop in the dukedom of Leo. Their spirit, energy, and spirit were truly something. This was his troop. Kant smiled and said happily, "Thank you for your hard work. Everything is for you, for Svaldia." Firentis, who was in the front, answered solemnly. His words represented the thoughts of all the soldiers behind him. Kant smiled and nodded. He looked at the city wall in front of him that had already taken shape. The Oasis Lookout was safely protected by these solid and thick stone walls. It was like the inside of the wall and the outside of the wall were two completely different separated worlds. With this city wall, Trondheim truly became a fortress. Only then, he truly took root in the Oasis Lookout. "Firentis," Kant said. "I'll listen to your orders, my lord," Fate replied. His tone slowed down. Kant ordered, "Cancel the troop assembly and immediately organize the city defense system." "Understood." Firentis nodded in response. As a military noble, Firentis had his own unique views on the command and arrangement of the Swadian troops. This was the teachings of his family, and his lesson as a Swadian, as well as the experience he gained from his long travels. The troops quickly dispersed, but it was not chaotic. The heavy cavalry of Swadian moved first, and then the footmen and light footmen followed. The planning for the desert area in the eastern military zone had been done. Although they didn't build the military barracks and other military structures in that area yet, it was still can be used as a temporary camp. The soldiers were on guard regularly, and those who were nearby the eastern gate could react in time as well. The rangers of Ravenstern were divided into groups, and they were stationed at the top floor of the council hall and towards the direction of the city wall. Everything was in perfect order. All right, the current Oasis Lookout has reached a new chapter. Kant narrowed his eyes, and his eyes were filled with coldness. He turned his head to Manat and Firentis, who had returned from deploying the troops, said, "Come with me. I remember that we once captured a guy who claimed himself a high-level Jack Allen. It spoke the fluent human language and gave me the feeling that it really was a high-level elite." Firentis and Manat were not amused by Kant's joke. Firentis walked in front, he led the way and said, he was previously imprisoned in the basement of the council hall. "So it is now?" Kant smiled. Returned to the council hall, the once narrow hall had become a 4-meter-high spacious hall. There were no extra rooms and kitchens anymore. If they removed the long table, it would not be a problem to hold a ball in the hall. Kant understood that this was a transition to the castle hall. Although many rooms in the council hall had disappeared after leveled up, the basement was still existed and even expanded. Azaj, a self-claimed high-level Jack Allen, who came from the kingdom of Greymane on the Mannheim coast. It was imprisoned in the basement that had been converted into a prison cell. The wooden door of the prison was locked with iron chains. If there were any unusual sounds, the guards in the hall would go over to check. Kant had once given an order that if the situation was at stake, the guards were allowed to kill. They couldn't let a high-level Jack Allen from a foreign land escaped, even if the soldiers had to kill it when necessary. "Lord, please wait a moment." When they came to the corner of the hall, there was a lid on top of the stairway. After opening it, there was the basement that had been converted into a prison cell. A Swadian footman led them to the prison cell. As the iron chain was unlocked, the footman brought up Asaj, who was heavily guarded and both of his hands were restrained by an iron chain. Kant narrowed his eyes and looked at the well-dressed Jack Allen. Even he could tell that this Jack Allen's mental status was weakened compared to when they first met. It looked exactly like a human. For some reason, Kant could not stop thinking when he looked at this beast-like humanoid creature. He kept staring at Asaj, and his eyes revealed his worry. That was indeed the case. Its long sharp fangs can be seen in between its lips, with its wolf-like head and the gigantic body, it was indeed a beast. But in reality, this Jack Allen was really what it claimed to be. It was really a high-level Jack Allen, possessing emotions that were similar to humans, or perhaps it could be said that it possessed intelligence that was as good as humans. This was what Kant worried about. His eyes exposed the fear in his heart. Wild beasts were not scary, just like the Jack Allen tribe in the Naran Desert. However, if these wild beasts became civilized and formed a civilized country, then they became scary. "Come out, behave yourself," the Swadian footman said with his deep voice. He rudely pulled the chain and dragged Asaj's hairy head to the basement stair. He even gave it a strong kick with his iron boots. These level 4 soldiers fought in a fierce battle. They were frightening. Moreover, this Jack Allen's hands were restrained by the iron chains, and his legs were also shackled. It was heavily guarded. "All right, be gentle with our friend." Kant ordered the footman to draw back. Kant looked at the Jack Allen and said, "I know you can understand human language and how to speak it. Now, I think we should have a good talk." The restrained Asaj raised his head. The wolf-like head looked at Kant, it revealed with a human-like fear on its face. "At your command, Your Excellency Human Lord. Let's talk about your hometown." Kant smiled and was very happy with its tactfulness. For example, the Mannheim Coast and Greymane Kingdom. Chapter 100, Secrets of the Kingdom of Greymane. Kant's voice was calm. He still had a faint smile on his face, and he had a young and innocent appearance just like a human teenager. In fact, he did look like a young teenager on the surface. But as an intelligent high-level Jack Allen, Asaj looked at the 16-year-old human noble in front of it, its heart was beating fast. The palpitation was caused by fear. It could sense that this young human had very poor combat strength. He could not even compare to a young Jack Allen. But he glanced to the side. The guards in heavy iron armors were waiting. Their right hand was already holding the long sword on their waist. Although the long sword could not smash the skull like a warhammer, the gleaming long sword could slice through the neck instantly, completely cut off the head and let it fall freely onto the ground. Yes, the young master of human noble. Asaj slightly lowered its head. In the current situation, it had no other choice. It described everything it knew. The Mannheim coast was located in the extreme north of the Naran Desert. It was the coastal area of the Sea of Stars. Because it was close to the vast Sea of Stars, the Mannheim coast had high rainfall and abundant water resources. Therefore, the coastal area had dense vegetation, which could easily resist the desertification and allow countless species to flourish there. This fertile coastal land is the home of Jack Allens. Over thousands of years, these Jack Allens absorbed foreign knowledge, and formed their own culture. In order to distinguish those in the desert, they call themselves high-level Jack Allens. In fact, it was true. These Jack Allens had gained intelligence, civilized, and developed their own civilization. They were completely different from the Jack Allens in the Naran Desert that fed blood and were more barbaric. They were from the same origin but different clans. They were the same species but different races. The Greymane kingdom on the west side of the Mannheim coast was the best proof. The high-level Jack Allen, who had gained wisdom and had developed, soon occupied the Mannheim coast with the lizardmen who had also gained wisdom. Each of them established their own kingdoms and divided the territory of their race. However, the lizardmen, who were good at water, were more suitable for living in the coastal areas. They even once suppressed the Greymane kingdom. Then, in recent years, a large number of elves landed on the Mannheim coast and established a republic with the name, Elven Parliament in the eastern desolate region. If it weren't for the elves who indirectly alleviated the suppression of Lizardman Kingdom on Greymane Kingdom, the high-level Jack Allens would have lost the dominance of the Mannheim coast and could only seek refuge in the inland desert. This was also the reason why Azage, as an explorer and merchant, had ventured across the desert and brought itself here. The high-level Jack Allen of the Greymane Kingdom also had their own strategic plans. The high-level Jack Allen knew that the Lizardmen, who were better at naval warfare, and the elves, who were more civilized, were the two terrifying enemies to them. The Greymane Kingdom was unable to pose a real threat to them. They could only rely on their 1,000 years of experience, tactics, and their current strength to maintain the current stalemate. But the situation was worsening day by day. As a result, the Mannheim coast remained peaceful, but it was a stalemate before the outbreak of war. However, as the Lizardmen opened up the sea trading line and connected with the outer sea trade, their economic development and strength increased extremely fast. Although the Elven Parliament had the least number of people and occupied smaller land. However, due to their colonial nature, the elves could transfer troops from the outer seas Elven headquarters at any time, and their strength also increased extremely quickly. They could become a giant republic in the next few years. The Elven Parliament on the Mannheim coast was intentionally a colony of the Elven mainland after all. Only the Greymane Kingdom made no progress. In order to make use of their advantage in land warfare and the ability to withstand heat and cold, the high-level Jacklands took the risk and organized several teams to go deep into the Naran Desert. They planned to find an inland human kingdom by following the descriptions of the low-level Jack Allen from 10 years ago. In fact, they crossed the desert and arrived here smoothly by following the route of the low-level Jack Allen. Not only did they found the traces of the human kingdom, Azage as a merchant had also found a natural salt mine. As the news traveled back, it had stimulated the Greymane Kingdom. The kingdom planned to send out huge troops to establish a new estate. However, Asage's fate was tragic. It was the first to explore Naran Desert and opened a safe route, but it was captured by Kant. It lost the honor and money that it supposed to has. Azage didn't even know if he could survive or not. There were human merchants on Mannheim coast. In the eyes of the high-level Jack Allen, although there were some strong extraordinary humans, but most ordinary human were extremely weak. A normal human adult could not even defeat a weak young Jack Allen. This was why they dared to carry out their invasion plan. On the battlefield, even the Lizardmen and the elves were terrified by the heavily armored Jack Allen warriors. How could a weak ordinary human defeated them? Azage slowly shut its mouth. After a long time of talking, its mouth was dry. This was all it knew. Well, very good. Kant nodded, still wearing a smile on his face. Azage's eyes glanced at his smiling face, and its heart was flustered. This kind of noble-style smile was just like a stretching exercise for his cheek. The smile clearly did not reflect his mood. This made its heart even more flustered. Swallowing its saliva, it suppressed the fear in its heart and said, "I hope that you can give me a chance to prove my worth." Hey! Kant was still thinking. Azage did spit out a lot of information, which brought a lot of information on the new world to Kant. But after hearing this, Kant smiled and asked, "What kind of value can you bring me?" Gulp! Azage swallowed its saliva as if it had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. It said anxiously, "I'm different from those low-level Jack Allen in the desert. I can rely on you and help you investigate the information of the Greymane Kingdom, and I can also be a middleman. I can buy whatever you lack. The commerce in Mannheim coast is very developed, there are plenty of goods there. Is that so? Kant raised his eyebrows slightly, showing great interest. Azich's eyes revealed a slight of joy. But in its heart, it was thrilled. As a merchant, it knew how to deceive the other people, especially such young master of human noble. Perhaps Kant held great power, but in terms of ability to judge, he was obviously not good. Azich swore that if it could leave this place, it would let the troops of the Greymane kingdom flatten this place. This prison was the place that robbed its wealth and future. It had been imprisoned for so many days. The hatred in its heart was simply hard to wash away. At this moment, it had to act obediently. Azich's eyes were filled with hatred. The smile on its face became even more sincere because it was already thinking about how to torture these damned humans and let them know the terror of a high-level Jack Allen. Well, in that case. Kant smiled and turned his head to look at his left and right sides. Those were Firentis and Manad, the leaders of his army and trade caravan, as well as his current generals and advisors. He slightly shrugged his shoulders and asked, "What do you think?" "Not bad." Firentis frowned and nodded. "Very good." Manad smiled, looking particularly optimistic. Kant raised his eyebrows and nodded. "That's good." These two gave him positive replies. Although they were worried, they still agreed with that. "Thank you so much." Azich lost its fear and appeared to be quite excited. It thought that it was safe. Kant did not explain anything. Instead, he gently knocked on the table and said in a calm tone, "Mannheim Coast, Greymane Kingdom, Advanced Jack Allen, Complete Developed Civilization." Azich looked at him in confusion. Kant nodded and smiled. "Very good. Of course, of course." Azich continued to smile, but in its heart, it was cursing this damn young human. When he kneeled in front of it in the future, Azich would lock Kant in the basement and let him have a taste of being imprisoned. Then, Azich would throw him into the pot to cook. It did not mind to taste the meat of other races. Take it out and get rid of it. Kant looked at the smile on Azich's face and shook his head with a smile. "Yes, my lord." Azich was confused, then it was dragged by the Swadian footman. "Wait, wait." Azich's eyes were full of panic. "My lord, my humble human lord, what happened? What happened?" It was not clear why Kant, who was just talking and laughing just now, asked the guards to drag it out. Moreover, it looked like they were going to kill it. But Kant did not answer it. What answered it was a well-made heater shield. Azich's face was hit hard by the shield of the Swadian footman. The sudden hit caused a concussion, making it dizzy. Blood splattered out of its mouth and nose, it couldn't say anything. Then it was dragged out of the hall with the chain, and out the door. "Boo-hoo-hoo-ah!" The slight crackling sound of a sword came through the wooden door. The Swadian footmen re-entered, their linen robe and scabbard stained with blood. "It's done," he reported. "Well done." Kant nodded, his face still calm. He just turned his head to look at Firentis and Manad. He said in a deep voice, "Since we have the confidence to contend with the Greymane Kingdom, then we must act as soon as possible. I don't want to be stabbed in the back by the nobles of the Dukedom of Leo when we're dealing with the Greymane Kingdom. Otherwise, we will be doomed." "Lord, this is very simple." Manad chuckled. "They won't know anything about the Greymane Kingdom. I will do everything I can to trap the expedition army of the Greymane Kingdom in the desert," Firentis added solemnly. "Okay." Kant nodded and slightly clenched his fist. "Since the Dukedom of Leo is like an iron wall, we can't infiltrate it. But we can develop toward the Mannheim coast. After all, that place is not only the territory of the high-level Jack Allen.